the board. Delighted to introduce Dr. Michael Bell, who will present what I believe is some significant news regarding the strengthening position of our financial posture here in DeKalb County. As you know, we entered this fiscal year, the most recent fiscal year, with a holdover deficit from the FY 2012 year. But if my intelligence is correct, Dr. Bell, based on his analysis, will announce today that the DeKalb County's budget deficit is no more. So with that, I'll introduce Dr. Bell.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, Mr. Board Chair, other board members. In your package, you should have the fiscal year 2013 June report. And as we all know, we're on a mid-year budget schedule here, and so the end of June is also the end of our fiscal year. As the superintendent correctly indicated, when we ended FY 2012, a report which substantially replicates this budget report but not in its exact entirety, called the DE 46, was sent to the state of Georgia. And it's that report, which is a very extensive document that we fill in, and then the state, we go back and forth with them, indicated that we ended FY 12 in a negative position, something in excess of $14 million. So what I'm going to report on today is that point in time on our internal reporting, but it's not the DE 46 status. The DE 46 status is, I'm seeing, is actually better than what's in this report, we think, at this point in time. Okay. But in summary, and we'll go through the specifics, as we look at the end of FY 13 and we take care of the negative position of FY 12, and we also impute the appropriations payable and some other adjustments, the DE 46 as of today is substantially positive, and that is the status that will take us out of the deficit position. The report you have in front of you, which is the budget report on page 16, indicates a positive position of around $7 million. Now keep in mind that can move up or down, okay? But the DE 46 number that we're looking at as of today is positive, and it's so positive that we feel there's not a great likelihood that it will go negative. So based on that, I'm very confident, and these are unaudited numbers at this point in time, that when this is communicated to the state and they accept it, we will be out of a deficit position, depending upon how they read it, and they then report back and say, this is what we're going to ask y'all not to do. We're hoping that the monthly reporting document that I have with me to sign today, that document will be, the need for that document on a monthly basis will be eliminated until the completion of our FY 2013 audit, which would be in June and July of 14. So, that being said, if you look at the first page of the report, you'll see the fourth column from the right is the overall good news about 2013. This shows that we collected, relative to our general operating budget, $761,817,000, and we spent $733,653. So that's a revenue excess of around $28 million. Now keep in mind, though, out of that 28, you've got to cover your appropriations payable, any other adjustments, and what's left over would go to cover the negative position as of the end of 2012.
If you will.
Dr. Bell, you may want to refresh the, not just the members of the board, but the viewing audience, that we had entered into an arrangement with the state of Georgia so that that deficit could be addressed over a 4-year period.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And so it's my understanding now that rather than a 4-year outlay on this, that we are now proposing, or we believe, that we will be able to address the deficit as it currently stands.
That is very correct. The reporting document that's in the red folder that I'm going to be asking for signatures on today did project a betterment of about $3.7 million a year. What I'm saying is the numbers we're seeing right now internally and tested numerous times is that we have overcome that FY12 negative position substantially, and certainly on the DE46. That is the essence of how the state measures this. They don't measure it necessarily on this document. They'll measure it on their own prescribed form. And so, that being said, now please keep in mind, there was a discussion about the after-school money, the 10% versus the 90%. The board voted to give us access to the 10%. That is all that's in here, not the 90%. There's no big component of the after-school money. It was the 10% component that we got authority from the board to use. So you can see on the pie chart, on the next page. Well, let me just, if we stay on the first page, the revenue amount of $761.8 versus the expenditure amount of $733, okay? That's the way it ought to be. You ought to collect more than you spend, okay? If you go to the right, you'll see what happened in 12. We had revenue of $754, we had expenditures of $821, okay? And all of that put together is the position we're trying to come out of. The next page, which is the pie chart, shows that we did slightly overspend the budget. We had a budget of $732,102, okay? Actually spent the $733,653, an over expenditure of $1,551. Now, but keep in mind, what is in that expenditure amount is the textbook lease substantial payoff of $12,000,003. But for that, we would have substantially under-expended the budget. Right. The next page, the third page in, shows the sort of the major revenue components. The total of budgeted $732 at the top, these curves. The actual collected of the $761,817. But in terms of how you got to a collection amount in excess of your budget, you can see the white box in there shows that on the local level, our primarily ad valorem taxes, alcohol beverage fees, and that type of thing, we had anticipated $370, actually collected $391. Now, that's good news. That's a sign the economy's turning around, that the decline in property values seems to be flat or trending up slightly, and so let's hope that that holds as we go forward into 14. Again, the bottom box on the QBE money, we had anticipated and budgeted $361, actually collected $370. Okay. But like I said, the overall news relative to closing the books on 13 is very, very good, we feel. And as we replicate it in the state reporting form, the DE46, it even looks a little bit better than what you see in this monthly report. So a lot of people are responsible for this. I think Mr. Thurmond put some cost control measures in place when he got here. Mr. Perone had put some cost control measures in place. There were some refinements that we put in place relative to booking ad valorem property taxes as we moved past the end of June into July, that are done in just about every other place I've ever worked, okay? That gave us some breathing room. And it seems to be enough breathing room to where we're confident that we are out of a deficit position, and as the reports go in the upcoming months, we feel that that'll be indicated.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I want to reiterate once again, and I'm sure all understand that this is a significant, major milestone in our effort to restore fiscal stability to the DeKalb County School District. And I want to thank the board for their support. So for the things that we attempted to do, none of it would have been possible without the support the men and women at this table, and well as the leadership provided by the staff and by every employee. Dr. Bell mentioned something, and I want to go back to it. We don't often receive any compliments, so to speak. Matter of fact, basically it's more criticism. But the senior staff, the central staff, accepted an aggressive posture in terms of reining in spending towards the end of the previous fiscal year. We received and collected more revenue, but what Dr. Bell said, which is very important, is that we also got control of our spending. And as you know, if you spend less and collect more, that's going to result in a positive outcome for any operation, including the school district.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just make one final comment. Please keep in mind that in terms of a fund balance position, based on the policies that we operate on of 1 month, that would be 8.33% of your budgeted amount. For us to attain that policy target, we need about $60 million in terms of a fund balance. Okay. When the final accounting is done on this, we may have between 5 and 10. So we have a ways to go, but we've, taken the first step on the path, and it's a positive step.
Discussion, I believe, John?
So this is obviously great news, and certainly it's good that we've been able to control spending. It looks like, if I'm reading the revenue sources right, a lot of this was because of improvements in the property tax projections and the beverage tax, et cetera, some of the local sources. And we obviously thank your team for staying on top of this. I think the updates have been great. I think that you guys have been very prompt about kind of collecting this information. From what we have here, does this, and I know you won't have exact numbers, we just went through this process, but how does this impact the way that you're thinking about the budget we've set for next year? And does that change kind of the level of confidence you have about, especially the revenue sources? I know we had talked about an upward revision in the projection for revenues kind of a month or so before we finalized the budget. This seems to kind of reaffirm that decision to raise the projections. Just comment on that if you would.
Yes, sir. Thank you. The news here relative to the end of 13 certainly enhances our confidence in the basic and overall revenue projections of the 14 budget. There are some components of the 13 end-of-year component that are not in yet and logically wouldn't come in because they relate to federal grant programs, okay? However, the basic revenue components of the local ad valorem taxes and the QBE money through the state are right on top of, at end of 13, are right on top of what we use for 14, okay? So if anything, this news relative to 13 enhances our confidence that the end of 14, provided we continue to control our expenditures, okay, will be just as good, if not better.
Mr. Mayfield?
Yes, Dr. Bell, and to the superintendent, I think this is outstanding news, and we certainly appreciate it. But I do have a couple of questions related to the performance against the budget, recognizing that we were certainly fortunate to get the revenue enhancements that we received, and managing expenses would suggest that the deficit, had those revenues not come in, that the deficits would have been worse than the 1.5 in terms of the comparison to the budget. So my question is, were there things, I mean, when I look at both transportation, I think there are about 3 items here that were over budget. I'm a little curious about what could we or should we have been able to do better with respect to the budget performance that we didn't do.
Thank you, Mr. Mayfield. The variability in the budget on a bottom line basis, okay, is, I think, well within the realm of adequate managing to the budget standards. And I see the point you're making about the transportation component We had a budget there of about 29 million, and then moved it because I think a grant came in to 34 million, okay? But if you take out of our expenditure, we did overspend the budget by this $1,551,000. But if you take out of that 733,653, 12.3 million for the textbook lease, which wasn't budgeted, okay? If you do that, then you're at 721,353, okay? That expenditure amount against your official final budgeted number is 98.53%. So, in a perfect world with a government entity of this size, what you want to try to do is collect about 102 or 3% of your projected revenue, and you want to spend about 92 to 94% of your budget. The difference every year, if you can replicate those targets, you're going to create that fund balance, okay?
Right.
Now, even eliminating the textbook lease, we spent at 98.5. That's high, but it's less than 100.
Right, okay. Right. And I appreciate that. And I guess where I really want to go, and my tongue is a little tied here, is to tee up for us, going into 13-14, what do we need to be most mindful of given the performance against this budget?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of your sentence.
If we take out the revenue from the equation in terms of what it brought to us to the table on this particular year, what does 12-13, how does it inform us in terms of where the big areas are we need to be most cognizant of when we look at 13-14? Transportation is one, at least in my mind. Mm-hmm. Instructions would be another, and I guess employee benefits would be the third. So would these be the areas that we would be most concerned, or is there something about the 14 budget that we need that's not among these three that we need to be most mindful of as we go through the year?
Yes, sir. Certainly the areas that you mentioned, first of all, transportation. In the 14 budget, we're in a rebuilding mode in transportation, and I think we have a very good handle on what we need to put in place and have budgeted for as we go forward in 14. Employee benefits, as you know, unlike other places where I've worked, employee benefits here are kind of out of our hands because so much is dictated by the state of Georgia. The state goes up in medical, on the medical costs, and we follow them. There's not a lot of management that you can do relative to protecting yourself against that, okay? One area that we're looking at, of course, is just a budget control by cost center, okay? We're looking at, budgeted amounts for individual cost centers compared to what the final expenditure was, and I think the improvement we can make in those areas as we go through FY14. So I think a lot of the old sort of pathologies that we had gotten into about, under budgeting legal fees, that's been taken care of, okay? Moving for substantial improvements in that area. Under budgeting utility costs because, quote, we knew it was going to be what it was going to be, and we were in a growing economic environment. Then when, boom, we got hit by the recession, those rules didn't work anymore, okay? We had to budget much more exactly, okay? But the biggest thing we need to do now relative to our credit rating is going to be to keep positively improving in relation to the fund balance and, hopefully ensure that our revenue projections are outpaced by our actual collections as we go forward.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. Mayfield, one of the challenges, of course, that we arrived in the third quarter of this particular fiscal year, and so what we really had to do, Mr. Chair and others, we were basically operating on a budget that we did not necessarily design, and so we were in a position of trying to react and place more progressive appropriations in place and with more accountability, and we were able to do it. My greatest confidence is that with this year in 14, we had the advantage of having this board as well as the administration look at expenditures as well as income, and I just think we have a much stronger document going forward. One of the things we also did was that we decided to maximize existing revenue streams. What we realized, and you see more revenue, but that wasn't just by happenstance. We began to look at the opportunities that were there that we may not have taken in the past or may have overlooked. And we're also putting some additional strategies in place as relates to QBE funding that I think will have a positive outcome in FY14, particularly in class size scheduling and so forth. And I know Dr. Thompson and Dr. Preston is here, might talk about it. But to your question going forward, the one challenge that we must overcome is that we must begin, number one, to continue to eliminate furlough days. And I know every member on this board spoke to me about that. And if the possibility presents itself, even in the current fiscal year, I think we need to try, if we can, Mr. Campbell, and I know that was one of your issues, to reduce the number of furlough days, and going forward to look at restoring the salary schedule here in this county. It's going to, these are decisions, the current condition is a result of decisions made long before you and I arrived, but for the future growth and in order to maintain quality faculty and employees, as we strengthen the budget, we're really going to have to look at compensation and salary for our employees, starting with eliminating the remaining furlough days.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. I certainly agree with your comments. Mr. Orson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Bell, as I think we've all stated, this is certainly good news. We want to continue to be vigilant, but the trajectory and the trends are in the right condition. A couple quick questions for you. You had mentioned in your presentation that there were some tweaks that you had made within your office to ensure that we were recognizing revenue in a way. There was something. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, just so that we understand the steps you've taken since you've been in this position? That's my first question.
Yes, sir. One of the things that, any entity of this size that has another entity collecting most of their money, which is the ad valorem taxes, is that when you get to the end of your fiscal year or your accounting period, you're going to have substantial flow-through, i.e., money will keep coming in after June 30. We got weekly revenue wires from the tax commissioner's office that showed components for motor vehicle, for the motor vehicle catch-up, for personal property, for ad valorem property, and there are codes on that. And in my prior positions, when something said PY, it meant prior year. We developed a practice here of just cutting that off and taking that revenue right into the year you were looking at. And I directed my staff to push that back into 13. Legally, no one was paying their property taxes for 14. The tax bills haven't gone out. Okay, so I think we picked up several $1 million during that process during the early part of July, just recognizing that revenue coming in was really for the budget year 13 behind us. Okay.
So that suggests to me, though, that we're also hopeful that the economy will improve, because that is money I guess we would have baked into the 2014 revenue stream. So I think your accounting decision is correct. I have no argument with that. I think we have spent too many years not following proper accounting rules. But I guess past practice has been that money that would come in after June 30th would just roll over into the next fiscal year. So based on our past practice, so this goes back to, I guess, Mr. Mayfield's question too about your confidence in the 2014 budget, and just to confirm that you've built that based on proper accounting rules as opposed to this poor practice of just taking revenue in based on when it arrived and not on proper allocation.
Well, it wasn't necessarily improper accounting to if something came in on the 5th of July to say, well, that is going to be for 14, you're going to get to use it in your general operating budget either behind you or in front of you. But what was our problem? Our problem was the fund balance situation we needed to cover at the end of 13. So obviously the best thing for our fiscal posture, our financial posture, was to correctly account for it behind us, so when we closed the books, we had this growing fund balance rather than to wait a whole additional year for the end of 14. Now, when we get to the end of 14, we haven't charted 14 because what's going to happen? In June, at the end of June in 14, you're going to have the same process. You know, DeKalb County was established, what, in 1832 or something like that? You're going to have the same process that will come through the books at the end of 14. So it just is going to keep going forward.
Okay, understood. And thank you. Two other quick questions about that. We know, we talked a couple months ago about the implications of the change in the ad valorem automobile tax, the birthday tax, and that there was always some speculation counties and other school systems might see some acceleration of revenue in one hand, and nobody knows what the impact, quite frankly, what the impact was going to be on the back end. Have you been able to think about that issue any more about in terms of the impact of the change in the law on the birthday tax?
Yes, sir, and you see it if you go to page 3 in the package. The birthday tax issue relative to motor vehicles, which is something I know that Mr. Thurmond was very interested in looking in as we started building the 14 budget, and just talking to folks at the county and in other governments. I think that if you look at the middle box, the $370 million to the $391, we did project about a $3 million plus birthday tax bump. We got that, and I think it's part of that collection of that $391. Now, we've assumed another component of that in 14, right? Now, the issue is going to be after some number of early years, it's going to trail off. And the question is going to be, when will it trail off? But with the sort of the return in, or at least the holding of real estate values in the county, it'll be caught up under the overall ad valorem number. So I feel confident that we did attain the birthday tax target at the end of 13, okay? And I think if we don't attain our target during 14, it's going to be overcome by just the maintenance of the growth and the rest of the ad valorem digest, okay, going forward. Keep in mind that before erosion, the tax documents sort of indicate we're going to collect about $385 million in ad valorem under our present, what they call consolidation report, and our millage rate. Right? That is substantially above what we've projected. Okay. Also, some good news that came in from the tax assessor's office was they were worried about thousands of appeals, and the official report put the number of appeals at about 7,300. So that's good. That means there's many thousands less number of appeals in DeKalb County than what they thought they were going to end up with. Okay, which means there's fewer people disputing their property value. So that argues well for more ad valorem rather than less as we go forward.
Okay. And then my last question, which is not one we will really be able to answer today, but you highlighted it about health care costs, and that's something that in part we are stuck with sort of how the state currently negotiates their health care arrangements. Are there plans? Have we had any discussions? I know this is, and we're not the only jurisdiction that faces this problem, but it is really coming close to being a crisis for systems like us because we are stuck at the tail end of how the state negotiates their agreements about alternatives. I mean, do we have legal opportunity for alternatives? Are there discussions at the state level at looking at different models? I mean, because this is going to be a growing problem, you know, for us and for every other jurisdiction in the state.
I would call on Dr. Ward Smith to assist in answering that question.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question, Mr. Orson. In response to the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, the State Health Benefit Plan is working with all districts to ensure that we look at the rules and regulations that are coming down. As you are aware, those regulations are not required to be enforced until January 1st, 2015. So essentially, we have another year to come up with a plan, but note that we are in constant collaboration with the state as well as other districts as to how these particular guidelines will impact districts, and hopefully they will come up with a more affordable plan essentially for those individuals who fall into that 90th percentile for which we are required to provide benefits. But yes, sir, please note that we are once again in constant collaboration, not just with the state health benefit plan, but with other districts as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Campbell?
Dr. Bell, just a couple of questions here. You talked about recognition of income and expenses in 13 and what may be in 14. Are we following GAAP accrual procedures here? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah.
Thank you. Second question. Late last year, fiscal year, there was some short-term financing that we did. I can't remember the identification attached to it, but it was 10. Thank you.
Tax anticipation.
Is that,
yes.
when you talk about our position at the end of 13, does that satisfy the 10 that was outstanding at that year?
Yes. The TANs are scheduled to be fully repaid on the 16th of December, and they will be, as I indicated there, it's a cash flow instrument. A cash flow instrument, it doesn't really get you any money you can keep long term.
Okay, but that's included in our 13 position, or in our 14 position? The payment?
That would be in the 14 position because the payment is, like I say, is due in December.
Okay. And then the final question, when you talked about credit ratings and fund balances, is that a snapshot at the end of the fiscal year? Is that something, I know corporations tend to have an earning call. How does that work for the county? In terms of credit ratings,
yeah.
When you guys do a great job managing the budget, does that affect our ratings during the year?
Generally, credit ratings are given when you go to issue debt. The note was a type of debt, it's short-term debt, and we got a MIG-1 rating on those notes, which is the highest short-term rating you could get. But y'all heard me say that in the credit write-up, Moody's was concerned, and Moody's was waiting to see the results of our 2012 audit. That's not back from the state yet, and it's going to be a tough one. Y'all heard me say that, okay? We're going to, when that document is finished and can be promulgated and given to the board and discussed, we're going to get into a discussion with Moody's. We've already started talking to our FA about it. The issue relative to our long-term credit rating is that the only bonds that we have outstanding that are long-term are really backed by the sales tax stream of revenue, not by these ad valorem taxes, okay? And our sales taxes have been holding pretty well, and they grow over 100% every year. So I think we have a good argument that we can make with Moody's. Leave our we actually have two credit ratings long-term. We have a AA3 by Moody's and a AA1 intercept rating, okay? The state of Georgia, amongst a number of other states, has an intercept program, which because the sales tax money comes through the state, if it appears that a school district is not able to make a payment, they will intercept your sales tax money and send it to the trustee to pay the bonds. Philadelphia has a similar program. Some other states have that. So we actually carry two credit ratings. We have a AA1 intercept rating, which is just one step below AAA. And then we have a AA3. The three Moody's ratings are AA1, AA2, and AA3. After AA3, you go down into single A1, okay? So the long-term debt we have out there is backed by our SPLOST money, so we have a good argument saying, look, don't touch us on that. Sales taxes are doing fine. The economy is holding up relative to that revenue stream, and it's really not an ad valorem property tax issue.
Dr. Morley?
I just want to reiterate, Mr. Thurmond, Dr. Bell, and staff, most certainly, we really appreciate all the efforts, and it's so good to know that you're entering into a new phase and that the deficit is being eliminated. And it is very difficult to start one behind or one down and cleaning up someone else's mess. And I most certainly would want to reiterate that it's very important that we do not only reduce the furlough days, that we do everything we can to eliminate them. And it's also imperative that if we're expecting educators administrators to be out here doing a great job, that we actually remunerate them for the job that they're doing. And the calls and I was at church yesterday, and a DeKalb County employee intercepted me in talking about the salaries. And so if we want to get quality people, we've got to pay quality money, and I would like to be able to see that as we go through this process. And Mr. Thurmond, you and I have talked about it, and I know the board would like to see this, that we move forward in doing that, and with great haste. If we had a crystal ball, it would be great. I don't think any of us would be sitting here. We'd be doing some other things, so we'd be able to predict the future. But we do have to look at the reality that a budget is a budget, and we might not be all the time on top of everything that's going on, but I am expecting, and the board is expecting, that through Mr. Thurmond, Dr. Bell, and the staff, that we are on top of things. And it's also important as we go through the process that not only does Mr. Thurmond and Dr. Bell have confidence, that this board has to have confidence in Mr. Thurmond and Dr. Bell and the staff to do what's necessary in order to move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Morley. John?
One last quick question, because we brought up the Moody's topic, so I just had a quick question about our long-term credit rating. Obviously, we want to maintain a very high rating with Moody's because that's indicative of overall financial performance and stability in the system. As I'm thinking through any repercussions from a 2012 audit, et cetera, are there any ways in which we would have immediate term financial repercussions from a ratings change from Moody's? That I'm trying to think through if there are any long-term debt situations we'd have to enter into, or do you feel that's more just a reflection of our overall stability and performance? It's not necessarily going to lead to any short-term financial consequences. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir, Mr. Coleman. We're not scheduled to issue any long-term debt right now, and so if there's any change in our rating status, I don't see any short-term or near-term impact. We're going to issue TANs every year as long as we maintain the MIG-1 note rating. I don't see any immediate impact. Now, if you were a holder of a DeKalb County bond that you bought at 100 cents on the dollar, and there is some change in the rating, then you might, if you decided to sell it, you might get 99 or 98 cents on the dollar for it, but your interest payments will be exactly the same. There won't be any impact in terms of the payments that you were promised when you bought the bond. And if you if you hold the bond and you don't let it go in the secondary market, you don't take a loss at all.
Thank you. Before we leave this item, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the superintendent and staff for the job that you've done to deal with the budget deficit issue. And one I know in particular, Mr. Superintendent, you have analyzed all of the programs in the school district. You've analyzed the FTE count and the problems we've had with the FTE analysis in years past, resulting in a loss of substantial income. And certainly we want to acknowledge that, and acknowledge that, through your efforts and hard work, you have reduced the budget and certainly put us on a course to improve our financial status, and certainly be accountable as our citizens and expect us to be. And I just want to thank you and staff for that, if you will. Is there any further discussion? If there are no further discussion, is there any opposition to placing this on the consent agenda? Hearing none.